So, right now, we are driving out to a place called Jay's Garage. Now, they're about an hour away from where I live, and the only reason why I would attempt to go to Jay's Garage in the middle of the busy work week is to pick up some E85s, because they are the only gas station in the Portland area that sells E85. There's one in Portland, Jay's Garage, and then there's another station down in Eugene that sells it. So E85 or race fuels in general, kind of a hot topic amongst the car community. And I don't think a lot of people really understand why that is, or why you would choose a different fuel. So today we're going to have a little tech talk about E85 and why you can get more power out of E85 than you can premium 92 octane. So it's going to get a little geeky here. I'm a chemistry buff, so I love this kind of stuff. So I love talking about it. So basically, let's talk about the advantages, okay? So it's not necessarily the fuel that gets you more power, right? We're talking about, specifically here, we're talking about forced induction vehicles, okay? So if you have a forced induction car, the one thing that you're battling is pre-detonation. What pre-detonation is when you have intake air temperatures coming into the cylinder, they're getting compressed by a supercharger or a turbocharger, and they get heated even more in compression. It's just one of the properties, chemical properties of atmosphere being compressed, right? It gains heat as it's compressed. And the problem with that is if it enters the cylinder superheated, obviously it goes through things like an intercooler to help cool it down, but sometimes it's not enough when you're dealing with really high cylinder pressures to begin with. You can end up with too much heat, and what happens is as the cylinder's coming up on its stroke, it gets so hot because it's compressing it even further that it detonates before the spark plug actually ignites the spark. That can become a problem because if it detonates at the wrong time, it can detonate before the crank goes over the peak of the rotation, and it starts breaking stuff. It's a huge problem. So it's not necessarily that the fuel gives you more power, it's that you can actually run more boost using this fuel, and there's a couple reasons, okay? One of the reasons is that E85 and all alcohols in general, anything with the suffix -nol, ethanol, methanol, right, is an alcohol. It has a chemical property. It's called, it has a very high latent heat of evaporation. And what that means is as the E85 is making its phase change from a liquid to a gas, an atomized form, it absorbs a lot of heat out of its surroundings. It's just like, it's the same premise as running methanol, right? People inject methanol into their intake, and the expansion of that gas will actually take a lot of heat out of the surroundings, which decreases your intake air temperatures after your charge past your turbo or your supercharger has been compressed, okay? Ethanol is doing the same thing as a methanol injection. It's just doing it with the whole fuel itself. So you can run really high boost levels, you can have really high cylinder pressures on E85 because of that evaporative property. Now, E85 has its drawbacks. There's a couple disadvantages, and it all boils down to efficiency, availability, and of course it has a property called being hydrophilic. We'll explain that here in a minute. So basically the first problem is efficiency. Now when you look at a stoichiometric ratio, which is the perfect balance between your fuel and oxygen to get a perfect burn, right? In octane, your regular gas, you're looking at about 14.7 molecules of oxygen to 1 molecule of fuel. Okay, that's your stoichiometric burn for octane. With E85, it's about 9.8 to 1, which means you're actually using a lot more fuel to get a stoichiometric ratio. And the other thing that you have to do to compensate that is you have to have a fuel system that supports it. Now in my race car, I have to have a minimum of 1,000 cc injectors just to run E85, because if you run any less, you'll never get enough fuel flow into the cylinder to get a stoichiometric burn. And for a lot of people, you have to really build the fuel system to be able to support that. Now the other problem is the fact that it's hydrophilic, so that means that it attracts water over time, and that can become very problematic. Octane has this property, but it's not nearly as bad as E85. And basically what that means is if you're gonna have E85 in a tank or fuel lines or injectors for a long period of time, it will attract water to it just from the atmosphere. Even though your tank can be sealed, it's still vented, the pressure is vented just a little bit, and it can still draw moisture out from its surrounding. And what that does is if you don't have injectors or a fuel pump or a fuel filter assembly with stainless steel internals, it'll actually start to corrode the internals on those key components, which will cause them to fail. And that leads to the last problem, which is availability, right? And because E85 is hydrophilic and attracts water, no gas station really wants to store it, because if it's not getting consumed on a regular basis, they could run into a scenario where they have to throw it away, and that's not good for anybody, right? The company wastes time, it's just wasteful to the environment, it's just not a good thing. So a lot of companies just don't choose to stock it unless they have the market for it, because it's not going to get used, and if they don't buy it in large batch quantities, then they don't actually make that good of a profit off of it. So I have kind of found a happy medium. You know, a lot of people are like, well, should I run E85? Should I run 92? Really, it's all choice. It's what you're going to do with the car, right? I think that a lot of tuners have come up with a good happy medium, and it's running what's called a flex converter system. My car uses a purchased flex converter sensor, and it measures the exact level of ethanol content in the fuel system at any given point, and it will adjust the tune accordingly. So what we're doing tomorrow is we're actually setting our baseline E85 tune, which is the maximum amount of power that we're going to be able to make with E85. And then we've already set our baseline with 92, which is our maximum amount that we're going to be able to make with 92 octane. And then the ECU, based on the input it gets from the flex fuel sensor, it will adjust the tune anywhere in between that. So that means I can drive to the track on 92 and then fill up my tank with E85 at the track, race, and then flush my E85 out with more 92 by filling the tank back up with 92. I never have a problem with corroding the internals on my fuel system because I'm always flushing the E85 out with 92, and I don't have the problem of only having the restriction of having to run one fuel. So there is a common ground between running both. But that's basically it. So we're gonna go get some fuel, and tomorrow we're going on the dyno.